to all you folks here on Facebook. Welcome to
Evening.
Monday Night Live in Lexington. Tonight is episode 14 of the Electric Universe updates, and Shifu Careaga is here with us to give us some latest stuff, the latest papers that we're going to talk about. So tonight we're going to go over the plasma petroglyphs, ancient American archaeology. We're going over Ferris wheels and the Dionysian irony and Megafauna Extinction, which that's one of my favorites. Let's do a couple shout outs here before we get going.
Wow, so many.
Yes. Hey to Susan, Heather, George McKinney. A special shout out to Heath Norrie, Susan, Corey Southworth. What's the weather like up north? Paige, Denise, Ann Davis, Vicki Turner. Shout out to you guys over here on Instagram. Hey to Matt. Thanks for joining us tonight. And and also, you guys, I got a new feature on here. There's a poll that I added for tonight. This is a new feature on Facebook. So do the poll. How many of the audience know what a plasma glyph is?
Reach back to the first and second episode.
Yeah. And if you didn't watch that episode, I have a playlist on my YouTube channel. It's the Electric Universe playlist. You can go back and watch it. I'll leave a link in the comments section later that will link you directly to the other episodes, all 14 of these.
So if I could start, I want to
go
give a
ahead.
request. I want you guys to subscribe to Ancient American, and then step 2, I want you to message them with a link for the pyramids. I want to get our Great Pyramids on the cover of Ancient American.
That
what
would
do you
be
think?
awesome.
Wouldn't that be amazing?
Yes.
This is the only diffusionist magazine. If you don't remember what diffusion is, that's the idea that there were travelers who went all over the world before Columbus.
We have so much proof that travelers went to different locations. They left their mark. We're finding all that stuff now.
There was a bog. There's a bunch of people they found in a bog in Florida, and they were perfectly preserved from 8,000 BC, and they have European DNA.
Wow.
mDNA. So, come on. I mean, everybody was traveling all over the place. I'm currently reading To the Gates of Fengtu, which is the Chinese possibly reaching Cahokia, and it is a lot of fairy tale. It does seem like what happened was they met and they recorded a bunch of events, and then those records were mostly burned, but somebody got them and made a long story. It does read like a Chinese novel. However, there are a lot of details in there that are uncanny. And considering the Piazza Dragon, in fact, if people want to look at the Nicholas's work, what is it? Something about the dragons. Dragon theory. Anyways, it's about the Piazza Dragon in Missouri. But
so you've been traveling a lot and checking out all these pyramids in Kentucky.
I've been going all over
all
the
the
place.
sites, and that's what we want on here. We
want
to get that on this magazine.
I mean, the thing is,
in the magazine,
we've got a series of pyramid mounds that are aligned to a constellation. No less important than Caracal or Giza. I mean, obviously, it's not as well engineered as Giza or Caracal. But Caracal, believe it or not, the layout, as good as their calendar is, their layout isn't as aligned, or isn't perfect, or maybe I just haven't found the perfect date. It's better than Broadus. But these people, they knew what they were doing, and they aligned their mounds to constellations, and that's amazing that we have.
It is amazing.
Still in Kentucky after all.
This is Kentucky.
So many things have been destroyed. Chris Dunlap was just telling me yesterday when I was in Louisville that there were pyramid mounds on the top of above the Indian caves by the old water tower, and those were wiped out to make the VA.
Oh yeah.
Pyramid mounds, and then there's some out at the airport that a lot of those were wiped out, and maybe there are some left but they're on UPS ground, so we can't get to them. So a lot of our heritage has been lost. In this case, the Army Depot just happens to be, you can't go there. So it's been preserved because no one's been able to do anything to it.
Yeah.
Which is a lucky,
Yeah.
they may have been trying to hide something, but by the time that base gets freed up.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. So plasma glyphs.
Plasma glyphs. Let me do a couple more shout outs. Hey to Jess. Hey, special shout out to Lee, Susan, Charlotte, Pamela, Jean Matthews McHatton, kiss to you and Beth and Christine and all you guys on Instagram. Okay, plasma petroglyph.
So you feel the heft of this paper. This has been riding my back for about a year. Guys, it is up. It is on uky.academia.edu/Shifu Careaga.
Right, and I'll get the link and drop it in the comments for you too.
What is a plasma glyph? First of all, it goes back to Pratt. It's a glyph that's been made. Think of the Rongo Rongo script that Anthony Pratt identified specifically could be made with plasma in lab. And so the most particular one, if you go to the Project Thunderbolts, they have the Squatter Man glyph. And those glyphs are everywhere in the world. In fact, I'll open up to the page so that you guys can see. I haven't released this. This is something Lee gave to me a while ago. Hey to Lee if he's watching.
He's watching.
And, you know, this site survey was done. This is Kentucky here. See that? Now, back in the day, they didn't know why it was shaped like that. They called it the Running Man, and that's a reasonable name for it. Now, I have it in here in the section to do with serpents because there's another structure there.
Right.
This is Frenchburg. It turns out that you could produce this upraised arms with the two dots underneath and the two legs in lab, and Anthony Pratt did that back in like 1991. Of course, it flew under the radar. No one outside of a certain very select group of people, such as Dave Talbot and Walt Thornhill, noticed. And they gave him hell for it at Los Alamos Labs. He had to actually distance himself from the EU people proper. He is a plasma cosmologist, but he's been, you know, he didn't get the worst treatment ever, but he's put down there. But let me tell you, he identified so many of these different plasma glyphs that you can start to form these motifs. Now, some of the motifs that I go over in the paper are still just your classic archetypes that, you know, like the cosmic mountain and the floating island in the sky, the cosmic ship, the revolving crescent, all of those that are identified by Dave Talbot in the Saturn myth. I included a lot of them in here.
So to catch up to people that haven't been watching the Electric Universe, when we say plasma, we're talking about electricity.
Yeah.
And we're talking
the primary
about
state of matter.
Things being documented on the Earth that people were looking at centuries and centuries and centuries ago.
What I need people to understand is that our collective human history has a collective religious history too. And we're talking pre-religious. When I say the religious period, that's all institutionalized. When I'm talking about this one world religion, I'm talking Jovian and Saturnian age. Actually, it's way back there before even the Bible was written, before Babylon, we're talking Sumer and before. And so they experienced a sky that was quite different. If people haven't seen Symbols of an Alien Sky, the documentaries, and the Discourses of an Alien Sky series, you really got to see that, because it's alien in that we don't recognize it today. And it explains why astrology was so important. It was literally, who's the god who's ruling right now? Who's the biggest sphere in the sky?
Yeah.
And what are the effects that are going to be felt? Now, to this day, there's still massive effects. The most important one you guys would probably know about is when we get close to Mars, at our closest perigee. Mars has a worldwide dust storm, and that still happens. And I think it's quite possible. We need to look at the planetary influences when these big dust storms happen in the Middle East, because the Middle East, latitude-wise, it's not near the equator, but it's super hot, and there's all these cataclysms that happen there, and all of that sand and dust that got introduced, I think it came from off-world, and I think that it has an interaction, because they've never really properly explained Earth and dust storms. It never really explained them. So I think that there's probably still planetary influences. I think there's tidal, electrical tidal, and so it's different from pure gravity. Of course, I agree with Walt Thornhill that gravity is probably also the ashes of electrical systems. In fact, in the paper, in the plates in the back, there's the M plates. And the M plates, it's all about the moon, but I show a couple of graphics. It's obviously much better in color on a computer. A couple of the graphics show very clearly that the excavated regions where there's less mass, there's physically less mass, there's saturated gravity. And the same
Wow.
thing happens on Mars, and I show
Mhm.
that in the M
Wow,
plates. Yeah,
that is interesting.
that doesn't make any sense, right? And
Right.
now
I
it
mean,
makes
it
sense.
shouldn't be.
Right. When you find a mountain, it would make sense that the gravity would increase there because there's more mass.
Right.
So why are there excavated regions? And this is a thing, they release these graphs, these pictures, and you get them on NASA. There's very little written about them. You don't find large reports written about this. It's just these maps that they get from their satellites, and they put them up, and that's all you hear about those maps. So the moon has that same feature where, you know, again, the ashes of electrical activity are the places where the most energetics is happening. And we find that also with national parks and you know, places around the world that we're attracted to. Even just seeing the picture of, we can sort of get a sense that there's something special about that place, you know, like certain mountains in China, etc.
Let's see. If you guys have any questions about this stuff, drop it in the comments. I'll try to keep an eye on the comments to make sure we're not missing any questions. And make sure you do the poll that I have attached to the live stream. How many of the audience know what a plasma glyph is?
So what happened was, well, first of all, you know, it became real for me when I pulled that Kentucky rock art book down.
Yes.
And it started matching the EU theory and the plasma glyphs of Peratt. So I started looking, and I started noticing asymmetric glyphs in the turkey tracks, the turkey foot, which I then later on learned from Lee Pennington are all-wing glyphs as well. So all around the world, they're producing these glyphs, and the ones that are here in the Ohio River Valley are asymmetric, which sort of sparks a thing in your brain, because that's not a turkey's foot.
Right.
Also, turkeys
else.
don't walk with, something else going on. And there are some really great petroglyphs in Kentucky, some that are actually stages. They're actually showing the stages of the alignments of Venus, Mars, and the Earth. Now, the moon is my primary mechanism for this megafauna extinction. And I spent some time in the paper debunking the comet theory. And the reason is, there's a few reasons.
Well, we have evidence of them, of several existing well into our era.
Yeah, and the thing is that the comet impact idea of the megafauna extinction, first of all, everybody now knows there's no way that humans killed all of these. How many mastodons and mammoths? Those are very dangerous animals to hunt. And there weren't enough humans, so it was very sparsely populated.
Right.
So it that never made sense to me. And the disease doesn't make sense because they're cross species. So I looked at it and I said, okay, could it be this comet? Well, I show in the paper the Carolina Bays did not come from a single event, and they did not come from a single impact of ice, and the ice chunks like fly over here and land. Sorry, Randall. I like you, Randall. I like you, Graham Hancock, but that's just not true. Okay, I spend some time with trigonometry, and I show based on the trajectories, they would be originating far and in different directions. So I looked again at the thunderbolts theory, and the reason is because of that quote I've read several times of the Delaware telling Thomas Jefferson that it's thunderbolts. And when we look at multiple cultures, and it's all in the tables in the paper, you've got multiple weapons of the gods, but the most common ones are swords and arrows. And so what is this? It could be this sword is this lightning bolt coming down. Right. Also, tridents is another name for some of these shapes, right? Shiva had one and Poseidon had one. And then the arrow. In fact, the arrow of Brahma apparently was so powerful that it when it came down, it turned everything to ash.
Wow.
Right? And this is in the Vedas. So you're thinking about what kind of power would that need to be? And I wanted also to make a whole strong argument, and this is the first part of the paper, that natives had no reason to lie.
Right.
They're giving us a history. They're trying to tell us. They're just trying to tell us.
Trying to record what happened.
They gave NASA a moon rock before they ever went out into space, and they didn't know what it was, So I mean, they're just trying to help.
Yeah.
And so I said, let's treat them like they're witnesses to history. Right.
Which is a good investigative technique.
It is. And I spend, in fact, probably like the first 10 pages of this is, talking about the logic of things and using these quotes. And so I step through, I show how the asymmetry is planned. It's at Eagle Mound, it's at Alligator Mound, it's on these petroglyphs. It's in all sorts of papers all over the place. And they never comment on it. They never notice. Hello. Hey, Heather. Heather's from the Electric View.
Oh, hey, Heather.
Guys, the Electric View is a great channel that is on YouTube, and they have a Facebook group.
Awesome.
Everybody should join the Electric View.
We'll leave links in the comments.
So I also needed, though, to show how you would kill the megafauna.
Right.
Here's the interesting thing I found out. Okay, so first of all, it was really hard. I talked to Michael Claridge from the Sapphire.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't know how to do it. I gave that presentation a year ago at the AKHA with some napkin math. I was using classical electromagnetism, Maxwell's equations, and Michael said, that's not going to work. I said, yeah, I know, but what else are we going to do? Nobody's done this kind of thing before. And so he was talking about atmospheric physics. Then I reached out, this year I reached out to a few people, but I reached out to Dr. Don Gurnett, who has a plasma physics book, and he made some suggestions. And the most exciting one that he made was use Io Jupiter's connection.
Oh.
Now, there is a incongruency there where, Jupiter has 20,000 times the strength magnetosphere, but we have a much closer relationship with the sun. So Jupiter only gets 4% of what the sun is doing.
Right.
Although there are some other equivalent. I have all the assumptions in the paper so people can see. So I looked at this and I was like, how strong will these be? I stepped through it. I learned a few things. I read Uman and Dwyer's lightning physics paper, learned a lot about lightning. And by the end of it, I did some raw calculations, and they're in here. And, for even just a simple single stroke, one stroke, boom, frying, the maximum bolt could kill things 60 miles away. And in fact, the larger the animal, the larger the distance between the feet, the more powerful the step potential or step voltage was.
Wow.
Yeah, so if you were standing with your feet right next to each other, the step potential at lightning is not likely to hurt you. But if you're at a full stride, the difference there when it propagates is going to create a greater voltage. And then you just use the resistance of the body. You can calculate what current. And then if you know the current, you know what stops the heart.
Yep.
Or can cause spasm and arrest. And according to the natives, that's what was happening as they were being fried. Now, does that mean that none of them went wider than 60 miles and were frying? No, I mean there could have been multiple strokes. There could have been a cluster of events and strike a whole valley. It could have been smaller too. Another criticism I have is that I was using that spherical measurement. That might not be valid at that level.
Right.
In fact, in a cylindrical, maybe it goes through the top soil. Maybe the charge is carried further and faster.
That's what I'm thinking.
It's possible. I have to take the more conservative.
Charge is carried across the earth.
I have to take the more conservative, and for sure, like the minimum was like 10 miles, and that's still amazing. If the Mount Horeb strike happens there, and someone and a bunch of animals die within a 10-mile radius, you're still going to worship. You're still going to think that was God. That was the sword of God just arrived and wiped us out. You're going to create a religion around that.
Yeah, and so man has always looked to the heavens for answers.
Yeah, and that power.
That's like the first place we go.
I think it greatly affected our culture because our culture inherited from the Romans and the Greeks. They inherited from the Babylonians, the Sumerians, the Egyptians, and the Hebrews. And they were witness to some of the greatest events. I mean, that part of the world. But we're talking about a part of the world that seemed to be hit so hard that it took them all the way to 1000 AD to really kind of come back to full strength. I mean, there were mound builders, but they didn't. I hate to use the word, but civilized. They didn't become more like a feudal civilized society until basically the Christian era. So why would that happen? I think Ken Tankersley's probably right. There were destructions in this area that were so powerful that it kept mankind from going. Because there have been people here potentially 80,000 years, and there's some, I think, bogus carbon dating of 150, 180,000 years. It's hard to know because I do have a feeling that these electrical activities would sequester some of the neutrons.
Oh yeah.
Steal positrons essentially.
Yes, it is. That's going to happen.
I think there were a couple of questions.
Let's check.
Up there.
Oh.
Oh, okay. So just be glad to leave.
Okay.
So then I had to do, a lot of analysis. I had to attack my own self. Although this is not going to make it into a journal.
Well, but
no one's going to
that's
publish
good
this in their
research.
journal.
Is
Yes,
you
it is.
play devil's advocate.
Yes.
And you try to tear your hypothesis down.
There are some.
Does it hold water?
I mean, some of these voltages here are just insane. Look at these.
So, kind of switch that around and let people see. This is all in the paper, so you can look at all the different voltages.
Yeah. So at the distance. So like for example here,
and stuff.
When we're talking at 100 meters, potential current at the max, we're talking 12.4 kiloamps.
So I'm going to throw a curve in this. I like the theory of it traveling
through the ground.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that going to be amplified with the quartz crystal and the limestone?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing. That's one of the assumptions that you make in the paper is that everything is basically wet soil and it's all like one type of soil. That's not going to be how it really is. Look at Half Dome. I have no doubt that Half Dome was cut by glacier, but I do not think it was made by glacier. I think it's an anode blister. It's a fulgurite. So that's all one solid piece of granite.
Yeah.
The entirety of Yellowstone. It's amazing. And even when you fly over it, I remember I flew over it and I woke up and looked out and there were clouds, and these clouds, it looked like an Olympic painting.
Yeah.
And then I knew we were over Yosemite. Right. So there's an energy to Yosemite. Probably if there's a thunderbolt hitting there or hitting Stone Mountain where I was just at or Devil's Tower, that's going to, when it pumps into the ground, it could go and pop out with even farther away.
Yeah.
In fact, I think that some of these strokes, if you're making Devil's Tower and you got one stroke going one way and then you're making the Black Hills with the other stroke going the other way, and you have that connection for a long period of time, I feel that it's quite possible the ground would become saturated with charge and that charge would move throughout. I mean, the Midwest is basically flat ground. It could have gone and wiped out everything. Now, how would the bison survive? Bison actually will go into caves, and they will live in forests. They will do things that many of these megafauna didn't do. And bear in mind, I'm not saying that every mammoth died that way. I'm saying that it reduced their populations to a critical mass. They couldn't reach other breeders.
Extinction.
They were hunted. I mean, you got hungry dire wolves. They have nothing else to eat, right? After a couple months, all that that's carrion, they can't eat it.
Right.
So now they're hunting everything in sight they can possibly find. In that way, maybe mankind did kill, but I don't think so. And the other issue with the comet theory that I had was, how are you going to be selective sometimes, but worldwide? How are you going to wipe out the mammoths of South America and Russia and the UK and not anything else?
Right.
I mean, comparatively. And most of them are large animals, and their legs are spaced apart. There are a few small animals, but again, that could be the conditions. There could have been dust. There could have been all sorts of fallout. Basically, the rough calculations of one of these thunderbolts, just a single stroke, again, was about equal to a hydrogen bomb.
Wow.
So now if you got thousands of these going off all over the place, it's going to be hell. And it's certainly going to be a memorable event, to say the least. Now, I chose the moon because the moon is our closest body. It could have been another body.
Right.
But the moon shows a lot of signs of arc discharge machining on one surface. It's all beat up on one surface, and then on the other side it's smooth. And
it makes sense.
We're very suspicious of. We used to worship the moon, but there are Babylonian tales where we're kind of like the watcher, and it's looking at us. And I think that there's a lot of evidence. I mean, if you look at an eclipse map of future eclipses, they're going all over the place. The moon is not just going around us like this. It's going up and down, and it's wobbling. It's doing more than they're saying. In fact, how do we have a supermoon? Sometimes it's closer, sometimes it's further away.
Right. And that's part of why I do every day the planetary influences, because I feel like you can really get tied up in astrology and astronomy, but I feel like the moon has the most right here now influence on every day. Yeah,
well, it is by far. It's still tidally locked to us. I mean, we're tidally locked with Venus still, but it's not always with us.
Yeah, right.
Once Zeus
The
sent
moon is
Athena into her
always
own,
there.
right.
Yeah.
So it's constantly, there's this influence between the two. It's very clear that it came from a different origin. I mean, you look at Mars, Heracles, it came from Saturn. It has the same tilt angle basically as we do, as Saturn does. The moon does not. And the Sumerian myth and the Enuma Elish makes it clear that Marduk sent this watcher as part of this conquest to become the great king. And then Tiamat's rebellion, probably when we left Saturn, left Enki, and we're floating through space, then we were captured by, and it looked to the people like Jupiter came near to them, and that would seem rather powerful. And then, of course, the big red spot on it, looking like the one eye of Horus, or the one-eyed. Yes. We're placing the other eye, because the other eye, of course.
I think it's fascinating how ancient man knew so much more about our heavenly bodies than we do.
Well, this is where we get into the Dionysian irony, because the amnesia. We have a question here. What if the electrical discharge was detrimental to specific charge frequencies, like only beings with certain charge frequencies? Well, that's quite possible. And also, I found a case of step potential where there were two soccer teams, and only one soccer team died. And it's clear to me, they thought it was black magic because this is in Africa when it happened. But it seems clear to me that one group of people had better souls and the other had cheaper shoes. Think about elephants. They have very sensitive feet.
Yeah.
And so it's no surprise that, probably mammoths were wiped. I'd say elephants in general were taken to the brink, and then they started to make their comeback. But there are some animals. I imagine ground sloths were
just totally screwed. What if ancient man figured out, when this stuff's happening, you need to be in a tree? Yeah.
I mean, essentially, you think about
not be on the ground.
The short-faced bear did not make it. But grizzly and black and brown bears, their cubs all climb trees. Right. Exactly. Short-faced bears are too big. Yeah. So it's very unlikely that enough of them were in trees to come down and make it. And why else? I mean, lions were here, and cheetahs and camels, and where have they gone? Trees. And it's not like they're not.
Trees are
camels are great at surviving.
And the megafauna too large to get.
Exactly. Or they were too far apart. A lot of these, like the ground sloth, they found like one would live in one cave, and there wouldn't be another ground sloth cave for perhaps 500 to 1,000 miles away. They would migrate to go breed. And that's just not going to work in that kind of environment, especially when it shifts really quickly and there's climatary change. Yep. And then you've got all, of course, the earthquakes, the volcanoes, the ash that was being put up in the air. I'm not saying that there weren't cometary clusters. I think any kind of large charged body that was approaching probably brought with it its own host of heavenly. It was a heavenly host, right? The Valkyries, right? Something that would come and bring raining destruction.
So, do you think maybe the sun's magnetic field was more active at that time?
In my conclusion, I have a step, that I lay out as the possible way that all this could have gone down. From the stage where we were in coplanar rotation to where we were in collinear rotation to where the rotation all broke down. And then we were kind of past hot potato with Jupiter to the sun coming closer. And as it comes closer, it starts ripping apart Osiris. So it's quite possible the sun was set, or Hades, and that there was this war of the gods, and there was a pulling apart of everything. Certainly, Uranus is turned on its side. There might be a Nibiru. I don't know. But I can tell you something big came in and disturbed the solar system. If people want to subscribe to a channel I think is amazing, Greg J. He reads a lot of Velikovsky and stuff, and he puts out some really good research videos that describe some of these myths, even more detail than I can possibly.
Is that the name of his channel?
Yeah, Greg J.
Greg J.
J-A-Y.
J-A-Y, Greg
so,
J.
I was driving one day up the I-70, or down, I guess, south on I-75, and it just hit me, Ferris wheels. These amusement parks are places of amazing irony. We go there to have fun. We go there to be scared with as close to death as we can possibly get without dying. Nobody wants to die, but we want to be nearly scared completely to death. This is not evolutionary.
A lot of people have adrenaline fix, junkies.
Yeah, but
we want the adrenaline fix.
But in particular, when I did the research for this paper, what I discovered is we started this amusement park craze basically within 10 years of discovering electromagnetism and how to actually do, not the early stuff of electromagnetism, but the true AC motors or DC motors and having light bulbs.
Yeah.
Very short order, we started creating these Ferris wheels, and they are, the one in Cincinnati, right up here, has the cosmic smile.
Oh, that's cool.
Just like the glyphs. There's a ride that I found where you're on the cosmic ship and it rotates. So you're on the outside and it rotates. And in the center of it, they put Saturn in the actual thing. It's in the paper.
That's interesting.
I found, of course, the cosmic. We got the Viking ship. You know, so this is the revolving crescent, right? These crescents, people, are not moons. The even the Islamic one, the one in the Om symbol, they're not the moon. They're often at the bottom. Sometimes they're on the left, and many times they're on the right. And then there's even ones on the top. And there's a name for when they go down and when they come up. And so we have these revolving crescents. We also have the cosmic pillar. And you get taken up and you drop all the way down. You nearly die. And you've got the one at the top of the cosmic pillar. They put the revolving topsy-turvy, and you hang. And this is one of the most dangerous ones. A lot of people die on these. They top, and it swings you around, and you're basically just a satellite. You become the Elohim, and you're riding around this Saturnian center as it goes around. Now, why are we doing this?
Why are we doing this?
Well, I think psychologically, I think it's catharsis. It's sort of like what Star Wars did for us when the Death Star, which is the morning star, the evening star, the destroyer of planets. When we watched Venus blow up, we were just so excited. Yeah. Right. We blew it up like 3 or 4 more times in the same movies. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, why not? You know, because you got to kill Venus for sure. And the irony is so sad for women. Thor is still everyone's favorite. You know, and even though there was a Martian near disaster, it wasn't as bad. But you know, it's unfair. But anyways.
It's okay.
So I'm looking at this, and I found an image of Coney Island in New York, and you've got at least 6 motifs in one thing. You've got the cosmic mountain, the cosmic pillar, the cosmic floating island. You've got the cosmic wheel. But you know what? When you're in the Ferris wheel, when you're getting catapulted up, that's as close as we, less than an astronaut, are going to get to the heavens. There you go. And people are terrified of Ferris wheels, even though they're slow and they've got cages. Well, I'm not terrified of it, but I have extreme motion sickness, so it would not be fun for me. Well, I was in line for the one in Louisville, and this guy behind me was telling me how terrified he was. I'm going, why is he getting on this thing if he's afraid of heights? We're compelled. Yeah. And even more weird is the one that I want to talk about is the dragon ride. So we have these dragon coasters at our theme parks, and you know about it. You don't think about it, but we put our children on dragons. So I started looking. How many anime and movies can you think of where we put children on dragons? Of anime movies with or live action like Never Ending Story. Kids riding a dragon. Kids on dragons. Why? Yeah. We need their innocence to defeat the evil monster, to defeat the dragon that is coming to destroy the feathered serpent. Yeah. That brought raining destruction around the world, and we conquer it usually with little girls, but sometimes boys too, and that gives us something even as adults. When you watch Spirited Away, one of the more powerful scenes is when she's on him, and then she gives him his real name, and then he transforms. Right. And then they fall together. This is like a beautiful scenery. That's all subconscious, in my opinion. It is. It is subconscious imagery and influence. And so we have these rides, and people do die at these rides. Yes, they do. Even silly things. We have the gravitron. We like to go in circles and alter gravity, and people they get up and they walk around and they get flung out. And why? Oh. Why are we doing it? It's actually I think one of the healthier things we do, because after the fall of the gods, we had a system of hierarchy. Back then, I mean, you had to give food to a planet. That's you had to do it. Everyone had to do it. And sometimes to punish the planet, if it moved out of its orbit, they would withhold food. And this is the delusion of an entire, let's say, Uruk. The entire city might be under this curfew. And everything in society was organized. I have no doubt that the Egyptians had a very strict religious monastic system. Oh, yes, they did. And I'm not saying that it was all slaves that built the pyramids, but it was very ordered. And now that all goes away. Remember, he shoots 9 of the 10 stars. The moon's the only one left. And what is left to regulate people? Nobody. So there comes back Dionysius as Bacchus. And now it's party time.
Yes.
Rome was party central. There were no more gods to fear. Not really.
Not really.
Right? Prometheus was freed by Hercules eventually, right?
Right.
And we existed without a truly hardcore institutional religion for a few hundred years there. And it was war and pandemic.
It was pandemic. And you know what is the sad thing is, a lot of us that are listening tonight were not taught this stuff in school. And
No,
like,
I wasn't either.
I think in past years they were taught more than what I was taught in school.
Well, you hear things like Zeus, this is in middle school, Zeus walked along and threw stones over his shoulder and that made mankind. And as a kid, you're thinking, well, this is crazy. Doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Well, it does in the context of when he came in and then stones came and pelted the earth. And then afterwards, everybody left the caves and agriculture resumed. And then suddenly there was an explosion of agriculture worldwide, but it started really strong in Sumer. People had been trapped underground between the Tepe period and Sumer.
Right.
They couldn't come out because the interaction between Saturn and Jupiter was just too dangerous. And who knows, it may become dangerous again. I think it's pretty stable right now.
Yeah, I think the longer the planet is in existence, maybe the more stability.
Maybe there is a possible. Okay, because Robitaille just did a video this week about the charge of the sun. It does appear from the evidence that the sun is pulling in electric charges and putting out positive protons, which for people who are watching, that's the opposite of what we want, because Ben Franklin, he messed it up. But basically, when you get pelted with lots of protons, you don't feel too good.
Right.
So it is quite possible that the Earth is slowly being drained of that original electric essence that we had. But is that what we're going to blame current behaviors on? No, I don't think so. I think that we had the religious period. In some ways, it was successful. In other ways, it was not so successful. And now we're in the scientific period, and the religious period is trying to hold on. There's a lot of people, they fight their family, they fight their friends, they fight, obviously, other religions on the internet and in reality. And they don't even understand where they're the same. People are afraid of things that they're like, oh, I better not, be interested in Baal because that's demon worship. Okay, well, the demon worship is an act, but Baal itself is just Jupiter.
Right.
Okay, and so Baalbek was a temple to Jupiter. Well, guess what? The original for Jehovah, Jove, Jupiter, it's the same thing. And El was Saturn. El and the Elohim was the Saturnian one god. Now, when they converted all that in the Council of Nicaea into a higher dimensional god, I am that I am, I think that was good for mankind. I think that it was there was a lot of problems with the Council of Nicaea and what it did, where it hid some of the secrets of the sacred sciences. But one thing it did was it gave everybody a greater sense of what God is. And what are we finding now when we look at the cosmos? Filamentary structures connecting galaxies, and they're all moving. The bigger the structure, the faster it's moving.
Right.
And the more electricity there is.
Yeah.
And that's not an interrelationship. The faster it's moving, the more inductance there is. And so we have the sun's putting out these little grains of dust, these little plasma grains, 4 to 5 volts each. There's tons of electricity. And we're at the point, we're getting closer where we might be able to put an antenna of satellite bodies out into space and actually funnel enough energy to the moon, microwave it back to the Earth. We wouldn't even need solar. Because we'd have the true
That would be
solar.
awesome.
Now, it might be a few hundred years away.
Maybe.
But we got to deal with our stuff.
If we can not blow each other up.
That's the thing, and that goes back to the Ragnarok paper I had done, and how much money we've spent on just one weapons of God, that Brahma's arrow. We have to find a way to, utilize these things correctly.
In a peaceful way.
Again, the Dionysian irony, the ultimate, because I talk about that happy face, the sad face, the sad clown motif. It's not just that, we have cathartic behaviors such as seeing end of the world movies and things like that, but we also need to deal with that sad clown inside that that aspect of us that for some reason we're making weapons of the gods and then pointing them at each other instead of at asteroids or aliens or whatever else we want to fear.
Yeah, let's point it at asteroids.
Yeah, well, it's insane the amount of money. I went over it before, but I think it was like if everybody on the planet was part of a family that spent $50,000 a year on food, there's basically 570 years of food since 1940, and that's just the United States alone on the nuclear program.
Yeah.
So and do these nukes even compare some of the hydrogen bombs compare with the Thunderbolts, but no. So do we really need governments that go on and develop this kind of power? No. And it's good that most people aren't aware of it, I think. We really have to do is deal with what these myths really meant. And one of the things that I end the paper with is Prometheus at Chernobyl. There is a statue of Prometheus, and he's in this kind of throwing moment. Well, go back to the myth. His liver was what was being pecked out.
Oh.
Now, how did they know that Prometheus's fire affected the liver?
Yeah. That's something for thought.
Some people probably think that maybe we had a nuclear war. A lot of people think the Vedas or the Mahabharata is about a nuclear war and the Sodom Gomorrah. I don't know. I don't have that answer. All I have is the electrical stuff.
All we have is what man recorded at that
But we got to
time.
deal with our repetitious nature. And
repeating the same mistake.
when we get a chance in a future video, hopefully we can go over the male-female and what Mars-Venus, just that interaction between Mars and Venus did to our currently, and not only to women but also to men.
Yeah.
Because of the berserker mode that it encouraged, and how we can get back to attaining Tao, attaining that way.
I think that should be the next episode.
Maybe, I don't know. Maybe.
All right, we've got it. I know we've gone over. Let's see, scientific alien astronauts. I've always believed, even as a child. Thank you, Trina.
Yeah, in the EPMC, I left it open. I don't include the Sitchin and Anunnaki stuff in the EPMC, but because it's extended, you can take EPMC, you can read, and you can modularly add to what you feel is true. If you have evidence, if you feel like the DNA evidence shows unequivocally that we are not like regular apes, which I agree with you, then you can make your own EPMC paper. Just let me know.
I want to encourage everybody to take the poll before we shut down, and thank you guys for tuning in. I will keep you updated on the next episode of Electric Universe Updates. Thank you for joining us on this Monday night episode. Kisses from Kentucky, and we will see you next time. Bye, guys.
Bye, everybody.